Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? About 2 years ago, I'm talking to Anthony, to RuneSlinger, in kind of a long messenger chat, and he says something like, I see that we agree on a bunch of things, we disagree on some things. Have you read this text about gaming? Have you read that text about gaming? And then he said, what I'd really like you to read is a game. It's called Circle of Hands. You may have heard me talk about this once or twice on this channel. It's by Adept Press, written by Ron Edwards. And he said, I want you to read this and see what you think about it. And so I read the game. I was really quite intrigued by a lot of things contained in this game. A lot of the ways it told you how to play. A lot of things you would be doing in play. And so we started talking about playing it one day. And 2 years later, finally, we get to play this game. And so last night at about this time, we started playing. About this time for me, I think we started at my 9:45 p.m. And we had told ourselves, well, we're going to probably have a hard stop at about 3 hours, because when you play this game, you play, the venture is the venture, the session is the session, so you have to kind of bring it to completion one way or the other. And so 5 hours later, his video is just slightly less than 5 hours. We hit stop broadcast, and we had a blast. So as is our custom, after each session of one of these experiments where we're learning a new game, every member of the group makes a reflections video without watching everybody else's. And so that's what we're going to do here. And so our group is Anthony and myself and Eloy, the Umbramancer, who's been playing with me in Lamentations of the Martian Princess and Star Wars and a bunch of other stuff. And we were going to have a fourth participant, but Same Old G finally backed out, and there was, had some scheduling issues, and also we found out there were some differences in preference in the way we were interpreting the game. So it was an amicable parting of the ways. And it's sad, but we're down to once again having 3 people involved in an experiment, and we're going to do the rotating game master format that we've been using in something like All for One Regime Diabolique, that we used in the Veil. So the agreement we've had is that Anthony would run 2 sessions, and then I would run 2 sessions, and then Eloy is going to run 2 sessions, and then after that we're going to evaluate and see whether we can keep playing the game or not. So this is my first reflections video, and if I sound like I'm tired, I am, because I was up till about my 3 o'clock, and then I had to go do stuff today, so a little bit wiped out. But it didn't seem like it was 5 hours at the time, which should at least kind of clue you in a little bit to how it went. So Eloy did us a great favor, and he made a whole bunch of cheat sheets for the game in terms of like the resolution mechanics, in terms of the combat mechanics, in terms of the stuff to do with magic and what have you. And so I was able to print a bunch of these out, our character sheets as well. And so I put them all in this little loose leaf notebook here. Very important to have all the character sheets. Why, you ask? Because Circle of Hands is a game where you have a pool of characters. Each person involved in the game, so Eloy and myself and Anthony, each of us made 2 characters. The GM makes 2 characters as well. They all put them in this collective pool of characters. The very first adventure, you as a player play one of the 2 characters that you created, and you choose the character after you hear the information that the Game Master gives you. It's very prescribed what kind of information they give you, and I'll get to that in a minute. After that, you can play any character out of the pool. The only rule is you can't play the same character twice in a row. You could alternate back and forth between your 2 characters if you wanted to, but I'm not sure I really want to. So we have information on all of these characters, and you can actually see the actual character creation process in a video that Anthony's made. And Umbramancer has released a video creating his characters, and I have a couple videos that I made about creating my characters not so long ago. So anyhow, we have all that kind of information. So, Eloy went above and beyond, really kind of yanking out a bunch of the mechanics out of this book, because it's not buried within flavor text, but it is, it's easier to reference in the document that he had, which was a big help. Doesn't involve referencing or it's not everything you need to reference in the book. But anyhow, the game's not heavy on rules. So let's get on with it and talk about what the heck actually happened. I found it to be a very immersive experience. The game opened up instantly, as it's supposed to, with us arriving in the location that we have decided was interesting. Initially, Anthony gives us one bit of information. There is a village by the sea, and the specific thing of interest that he tells us is there is supposedly a smith there that makes really high quality steel. Full stop. That's all we know. And so now we choose characters, and I chose my character Falk Wolfram, who was a scholar and a high entertainer, and I chose him because he seemed to be the fellow that would be the most interested in something like this. The other character I made, who was Ingolf, who was a peasant, it didn't seem like he would grasp the import of something like that. Or he would understand it was significant, but not as significant as somebody like that Falk Wolfram, because he's a smart guy. In the meantime, Eloy chose his character Hadric the Black, who is a former priest and a former black wizard who is now a gray wizard. Two very, very unusual characters for this Ironland, for these people that are used to really struggling and living, off the land on a very day-by-day basis. They were characters made within the full context of the rules. They weren't special snowflake characters, but they were unusual characters, but they seem to be the ones that fit this the best. And so we, arrive at the place, and instantly, it's very seamless introduction of the named characters in the venture. The very first people that we meet, two women preparing a body, and I don't want to give stuff away. They turn out to be named characters. In the village itself, very swiftly we meet the smith, we meet this other person. They are named characters. It's very obvious they are named characters because we need to make charm rolls right away as we're interacting with them, and that informs what happens next. And I don't want to give you a blow-by-blow of everything, except people did not like Hadric very much. And I was a little bit more successful in getting people to like me. And getting people to like you is really important in this game, because if they don't like you, they may actively see you as a threat and perhaps seek to eliminate you. One of the other things that we ran into, which was very, very interesting, was this game, the people are divided into 4 different social strata. Now, the Circle Knights are a little bit different, and so they belong to that and their social strata. But you generally, when you go to a community, the rules expect you to fit in, to start participating. The economy is not based upon money. It's based upon what can you do, what can you offer. And we found ourselves in some really odd positions because as this former priest and wizard, Black Hadric really has no appreciable skills. So his attempts to do anything, something to fit in, were interesting. And the fact that he was a wizard to begin with, and it's very obvious he's a wizard, and people do not like wizards in this game. It's not your happy magic user game by any means. Magic is scary and destructive and horrific. So he has some issues. In the meantime, my character Falk Wolfram, the character I was playing, I should say, he found out that there really were no gentry in the town. He's not a gentry. He is a professional, but the profession he has is essentially entertaining people of high class, being kind of available as the learned man, the scholar, the entertainer, and these people are all gone. So he had to figure out, well, who passes for gentry in this town? Who passes for somebody that thinks they're in control? Where can I get my bread buttered? And there were some other interesting things about playing a character in that social strata, because part of what happens in this game, and Anthony did a brilliant job of giving us information and not giving us information, is depending on what social strata your character is, you notice things or do not notice things. And this is automatic. You can make wits rolls to perceive more things based upon context, but once again, the number of dice you get to roll, that really has this big, giant influence on how successful you are with that. So there were things that we simply couldn't figure out because we weren't of the correct social class. And I don't want to dwell on this and the mechanics, but that, it made those being members of a certain social strata really relevant. And that was really, really neat. Our characters were not generic adventurers that fit in everywhere and could talk to everybody. There were very certain ways that we could fit in, and certain people we could talk to, and certain people we would ignore or would ignore us, or things that would simply completely go over our heads because we weren't used to looking for those things. And I also found it pretty interesting in terms of the venture component that Anthony put out initially, because you're reading this game, you learn how to design it yourself. And because we're going to be doing rotating Game Master, it's something where you kind of already know, well, how has he done this? And so he asked us, I think after the venture, what did you think the components were? Because you literally roll dice to find out what components that are going to be in the venture. The number of named characters is based upon the number of components. They're also not connected, because the preparation as a game master is really, really based on not connecting all the dots, not having some kind of pre-planned story or idea for a story. You're simply placing items and some relationships in this area. That's it. Full stop. And the characters show up. And then through interaction, they make some judgments on their own in terms of what's going on. Is there something I need to do? And the game is also really, really good at not giving you a clear bad guy, although there's a lot of admonition from Mr. Edwards to make it very soap opera-ish. And Anthony did a brilliant job with both. He made things very ambiguous in terms of between these two men that kind of had different opinions about how to rebuild this fractured town. There was no real clear right answer, which was interesting seen through the lens of my character. But I'm skipping around because I'm tired. But he asked us, can you guess what the components were? I guessed wrong, but I'm looking at this now, and I think I know which ones they were. Certainly there was the higher level component, the one that we did not know about, because there was a monster involved. Was obviously one of them. But I think it might have been a humanitarian crisis or a social rank tension. Probably social rank tension. But one of the things that happens on a meta level, I found as a player, is you do kind of find yourself guessing a little bit. I wonder which components, are involved here. And you kind of find out anyway. It's not something that was overly, it didn't ruin immersion or take me out of it, or it wasn't overly meta or intrusively meta. But there was a little bit of transparency in terms of what might be going on here based upon the named characters you run into and, the stuff you start to learn. Once again, it didn't feel meta, it didn't feel very artificial, it didn't feel artificial at all. Because it's like any other game in some respects, where there are certain things that seem to be important and other things that seem to be simply be parts of the backdrop. Do you need to go, is there something you're supposed to do with these things that are really important? No. And they're, based upon the people we met, there were things that we had to ferret out. We didn't go there and there wasn't this big glaring thing that we were supposed to do, or didn't feel like a mission, or aha, you finally found the bad thing. So that was really neat. The lack of connections really, if anything, was really freeing as a player. It seemed very natural. In terms of what was going on. That made the situation seem very real. It didn't feel like I was supposed to be doing anything. And so you just kind of sit there and play your character. And play our characters we did. And I had some misgivings once I found out that Same Old G had backed out, strictly from the point of numbers. And what I mean is, playing All for One Regime Diabolique, we went from having 3 players to 2 players. And I found out that when you're dealing with things that are nasty and want to kill you, the difference between 3 musketeers and 2 musketeers is gigantic. And frequently we were getting our rear ends handed to us. And I wondered about this in terms of being the Circle Knights and if that was going to happen as well. And it probably still is going to be a part of the dynamic. However, what happened in this game, as soon as we get to town, is the party kind of split, if you will. We went our separate ways very, very fast and only reconnected twice during the actual adventure. So the time was equally split between these 2 characters and what are they doing. And Anthony did his usual masterful job of flipping back and forth. And so I found myself thinking today, my gosh, if there were 3 or 4 players, the more players involved, the more you might feel like you need to stick together, or the more disjointed things might get as everybody goes their separate way. I don't think that's a bad thing, but I found the 2-player dynamic to be pretty doable. I could see that 3 would work. Over that, it might get a little bit tough playing this game, or you might feel a little bit more like you should stick together. However, if you're members of the same social strata, that makes sense, because a lot of time you're in this community, interacting with people, kind of fitting in, making your living, determining what's going on, or what what you think is going on, what's important to you. And if you're members of the same social strata, I suppose you could be right next to each other. We were not, so we were doing two completely different things. This was a lot of fun, and it was very, very immersive. I found this in some other games that we've played, but I had just as much fun, or I was just as engrossed with what was going on as Eloy's playing his character as when I was playing my character. And so that was, it made the session, even more, not just immersive, but gripping as I'm watching what's going on. The one thing that I found was difficult, once or twice, was to not act on meta-knowledge as a player. In other words, knowing, starting to put pieces together. And I didn't say this during the game a couple times. We definitely spoke out of character, enough times. And we were learning the game as well. And we made a couple, comments to each other. There were these moments where, I've realized I've connected the dots as a player now. I've made connection between this and this over here in different parts of the town. And what are we really seeing here? What seems to be going on with this one particular component of the venture? But as a character, I haven't connected these dots. And, I came close to crossing the line as I asked one non-player character something in terms of, like, what time did this particular symbol get placed on your house? And, I justified it by knowing that I'd seen stuff, relating to that symbol at the beginning of the venture. But it was really towing the line at that particular point. And so that's something to, I smiled and remember to file away to watch out for, because this can be very, very gripping, and it could be very easy to, in a situation like this where the dynamic seems to be that very often the players are going to, and the characters are going to be on their own. You have to be really careful of acting on this kind of meta-knowledge. We did have this scene, jumping around a little bit, where we got back together, and in the interest of time, because we've been playing for 4 hours or so by that time, we kind of agree, or I sort of say, hey, we're going to do this, guys. We'll share the information with each other. Let's not role play that particular point. Let's get to the point where we've maybe started to put 2 and 2 together and make some value judgments. And make value judgments we did. I'm going to let Eloy speak for himself in his video about some of the value judgments his character made, which were very interesting. And like, once again, I don't want to speak for him, but our discussion afterwards, and that is at the tail end of the actual play video, Eloy found a line for himself, because this game talks about lines and veils. Where do you come up against something that's disturbing or difficult that you decide, I don't really want to engage with this, or I'm not sure if I would do that again as a character. I didn't find any this particular time. It doesn't mean that things weren't gripping at times. The character I played, the key event that you're required to write, his key event involved his village being destroyed and decimated, and coming back and seeing that wreckage and kind of saying enough of this. And we run into a village where this has occurred again and again and again. And there's a moment where he goes out and responds to a scream in the night, is unable to save anybody to find out exactly what happened, but sees the aftermath of it, talks to some people that are obviously quite disturbed. I ascend an unnamed character by asking them their name, and it's quite dramatic. It was a dramatic, moment, out of character. It didn't result in a lot of stuff in this particular venture. But I took interest in these people, and it was gripping for that character to see things that were where the community was helpless, and it was interesting in a lot of ways, because I was able to look at life, or what was going on, through the lens of this particular character, and what would Falk Wolfram do based upon who he was. What the characteristics on his sheet said, the fact that he was fierce, and he was a rather proud person, rather charming, rather intelligent, but somebody that was, had a tendency to act very decisively, and was used to, pain, both physical and emotional pain, and he was somebody that was, once he identified something that he saw as needing fixing, he was the sort of person that would be very decisive about doing just that. By the same token, in being involved in this one other component of the venture, which involved, to a very large degree, these two men in this fractured town who were, neither of them is really a leader. I believe it was probably, the first component was this tension between different social strata. Neither of them were leadership material. They had different ideas on what they should do, and kind of based upon rebuilding the town, or what can we do that's of the most value here. But my character, being used to sitting around people of in leadership roles, realized that neither of these men had any. They weren't the people he needed to be talking to. The people that he needed to be talking to were dead. So it was very interesting to see how Eloy's character, Black Hadrick, related to them and asked a lot of questions, and how Falk Wolfram became polite and smiled and thank you for the dinner, but really became less and less interested in these people, other than seeing one of them as a resource, like where can I stay, how can I earn my keep. This is probably a good vantage point of this, in this town, to stick close to the person who thinks he's the leader, and while I take stock of anything that might be going on, and we'll see what happens from there. It was also interesting in one particular early point of the venture where I find the smith, and then he's not going to meet this other fellow until noon. I learn of this other character. Now, while Eloy's character is out there, Black Hadrick is trying to do anything to kind of fit in with the village, earn his keep, and what have you, as a professional. And as a professional in this case, who is not somebody that's a leather worker or a smith or somebody that's going to jump right in and start making stuff for the community and being helpful, Falk Wolfram is an entertainer. He is a scholar, high entertainer, a scholar. He has a specific social function. He can't do it right now. It's not something he does 24/7. It's something he does when the appropriate people are there at the appropriate time. And so he just sat around outside and restrung his lyre. Now, it wasn't just to be a special snowflake at that point, and it wasn't being a passive character, because if you watch the actual play, Eloy his character does a lot more digging and a lot more question asking and a lot more information gathering. There's a lot of role play involving that character, and very often, in contrast, with the exception of acting decisively once he's determined that this is important to him, and kind of taking charge and saying, I think we should do this, and swearing, I am going to do this, and swearing an oath, which we'll get to, which was a lot of fun and something I didn't think I was going to do. The appropriate thing for him to do was kind of sit and wait. And as a player, what I really wanted to do was then go out and do some more information gathering in the town and doing the same kind of stuff that Eloy was doing. But, from who is this character, that simply wasn't appropriate. So I did what Falk Wolfram would do, which was interesting. And it was fun. I was smiling to myself during the venture itself, thinking, this probably looks very passive, but that's not who this character is. That's not what he does. Let's see. There were things I didn't think I was going to do in this game, like swear an oath, because it can be very powerful but very dangerous, and I did. And we came face to face with filling up with color points and getting a magical gift of white magic, and also getting a mark of white magic. And Circle Knights do not necessarily want to get marked. They want to keep in the middle of using gray magic. But it's good that I did mechanically, because we were in a lot of trouble as we identified this Yuggoth that was troubling this community, which is a particularly horrific demon. It's interesting, and Eloy's character swore an oath, a non-player character swore an oath. There was a lot of oath swearing. We engaged with a lot of the mechanics. And not all of them, but a lot of them. We found that a lot of the mechanics in this game, in terms of general mechanics, really, really easy, really, really intuitive. It was interesting to see what we found difficult and what we didn't find difficult. The Mechanics and resolution, really, really intuitive. Once you use it and play, it's very, very obvious when you use one die and when you use two dice. Using one die is generally almost always automatic failure. And so that part was really, really easy, very, very intuitive. It was interesting in terms of magic, you know, how the two of us found it a bit different, the two players. I looked at the spell list quite a bit, and to me it just seems like a spell list that's very easy to internalize, figure out what they are, what you know. This is just how I think. Looking at magical spell lists, they're not very big. It's not a huge spell list. There's a bunch to memorize, but I had an idea of what spells were useful, like say in a combat, what spells are useful prior to combat, what spells are useful in other ways, and but I wasn't playing the wizard. I only had a limited number to draw from. Eloy was playing the wizard, and so it was a little bit more difficult for him during the combat section. He had more trouble. And I didn't want to say, hey, you should cast this, hey, you should cast that. Although I did want to say that, but I kind of let him make those decisions by himself. So that we identified some areas for us where we were going to have some issues. Combat, I like the system. I like what it does. I like what it represents. We all kind of had this idea going in. This might get clunkier in practice than it looks, and it did. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying it's a thing that we need to practice. Just like anything else in the game. It's one of these things like, yeah, this thing you need to kind of internalize and get right. And I noticed two places, just thinking about it some more today, going back and reading the rules, I think we got wrong. Without getting hyper technical, there's a split of quickness that you add to your dice roll. As you make a dice roll, it becomes both your offensive and defensive dice roll for that particular clash. And then your full quickness gets added to that roll, offensively and defensively, but you can decide to split that and add maybe double your full quickness to one roll and nothing to the other roll, or half, 1.5 of your times your quickness to your offensive roll, and just half times your quickness to your defensive roll. We were splitting, but I know I was just splitting my full quickness. So if I had a quickness of 7, I was doing like a 4-3 split. I'm sorry, I have a 5. So I was doing like a 4-1 split or a 3-2 split. That's not how I should have been doing it. I had 10 full points to mess around with, and I wasn't. And I think the other people weren't either. I think we were cutting it in half. Also noticed that armor seemed to protect us an awful lot against this horrible Yuggoth, but I don't believe we were adding our brawn to the damage rolls consistently. And I think the Yuggoth, maybe if we went back and played that again, the Yuggoth would have killed us. I'm glad it didn't. I'm happy with how things came out fictionally. I really thought, the combat was incredibly scary. I really thought that we were going to die. It went from, I really think we're going to die no matter what, to, and it was very funny that, despite the fact that Circle Knights are all physically badass, that they all can fight, that Eloy's character played kind of like the supporting wizard role and didn't actually engage the creature. Although he did do a giant kaboom spell. He cast Wrath, which was awesome. Because it's not a spell you really want to cast because of the fallout. And he cast a spell which protected my character as well. And in the meantime, I relied upon physical attack and attacking this hideous monstrosity with my spear, and then casting a spell of pure Urbaja hatred at it. Which was awesome. I got to expend almost all my brawn, because that's what happens when you cast these spells. You're pretty much setting yourself up to die or be knocked out in one hit when you're expending all your brawn casting these spells. But it was something that was really, really neat. It really felt desperate. The whole combat felt incredibly desperate, as the creature kind of summoned, if you will, the legions of Draugr that I had created, and really thought we were all going to die. So the combat was very, very tense, despite the fact that we were, it was a little clunky. We had to do some rules lookup. I think we got some things wrong. It's definitely one of those things I realized at the end. This is what we need to work on and make more seamless next time. But in terms of how it felt, really, really tense, really, really scary, really, really gripping. I am glad that none of us died, but I would have been okay if it had turned out differently and we had died valiantly. And it was interesting at the end of all this, here we have killed this creature. I've fulfilled my oath. Eloy has fulfills his oath off screen, and he has saved us as well, but also created this zone of pure Emborian, which is not a good thing. But we didn't activate any of the tripwires, and Anthony actually has a video he's not going to release until afterwards where it's his venture prep, because that's part of our agreement as well. Each GM is going to do their venture prep, make a video, not release it until after the venture, until after these reflections videos. And we obviously did not engage in all the tripwires because things went well, and Anthony narrated how this actually helped the young king in Roll-K, which is part of the conceit of the game as well. And it ended, and I tell you, the 5 hours elapsed. It was in the zone, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning for me. I'd been up since I guess like maybe 6:30 that morning, and took a long time to go to sleep. I was pretty excited, pretty pumped. I was pretty moved by the experience. It was highly immersive, a real feeling of like in character as character. And it didn't feel contrived. It felt very player directed or character directed, in terms of there wasn't anything we were supposed to do. It was easy to identify what things were important, but there wasn't the things that we decided to do felt like very in character decisions. They seemed like the decisions these characters would make, not necessarily decisions that we would make as the players. Just approaching something game as something to be solved. And yes, there were some moments where you had a little bit of meta knowledge, but you could kind of smile at that. It was, I can see this being another favorite game, just based on how it felt. And so I'm interested to see how the experiment goes. I'm really interested to play different characters. I'm interested to see other people play my characters, or the characters I've created after I play them, should they survive. So, first time with the experiment, like really, really satisfying. And definitely, if you look back at it, maybe this session on the outside from somebody else might look boring. Maybe not boring. I don't know. That's all you guys did. But it felt very, very meaningful, in the moment. And who knows? Maybe next time I will cross or find something that's aligned for me, or have a stronger emotional reaction. But I think that depends on the character that you're playing. I found that my emotions were guided a lot by who this character was, and it'd be interesting to see, playing a different character, what kind of reactions I'll have to situations that may be similar, may be different. So it was a good time. This video's already gone on way too long, but I'm a big fan of this game so far, and of the way that it gets played, the way that it gets prepared, the way that as player characters, you interact with the world, and the way that that world interacts with you. And it feels very, once again, the word that kept coming to me was very freeing. There's nothing I'm supposed to be doing. So I can just relax and, explore the world, and draw my own conclusions. Be who this person is in this situation, and see what happens. And it's a lot of what role-playing is about for me, is finding out what happens. So this game really helped me do just that.